The sound of earth hitting the pine coffin echoed through the cemetery just outside Walla Walla, Washington Territory, and Lillian Carter thought her heart might crack open like the dry ground beneath her feet. She stood there in her black dress, the September wind of 1885 whipping at her veil, watching as the gravediggers covered the last piece of her father with soil and stone. Thomas Carter had been the best horse breeder in the territory, a man who could gentle the wildest mustang with nothing but patience and a soft word. But all his skill with animals had not saved him from the fever that took him 3 days ago at the age of 52. Lillian was 23 years old, and now she was alone. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and her father had raised her with calloused hands and a tender heart. She had no siblings, no close relatives willing to take in a grown woman. The ranch was hers now, along with its debts, its responsibilities, and the weight of carrying on her father's legacy. The thought pressed down on her shoulders like a yoke meant for oxen. The other mourners began to disperse, offering their condolences in quiet voices that blurred together into meaningless sound. She nodded mechanically, thanking them for coming, accepting their casseroles and promises to check on her soon. Mrs. Henderson from the general store squeezed her hand. Reverend Morrison said something about God's plan. The words washed over her like river water, present but not penetrating. Then she noticed him standing apart from the others, hat in hand, his dark hair ruffled by the wind. Graham Lucas was a cowboy her father had hired 6 months ago to help with the spring breaking. He had stayed on through summer, proving himself capable with the horses and quiet in his manner. He was perhaps 25 or 26, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of sage. Her father had spoken well of him, had even mentioned over supper one night that Graham had a natural way with the animals that reminded him of himself as a younger man. Lillian had not paid much attention to Graham during his time at the ranch. She had been busy with her own work, managing the household and helping her father with the books. But she had noticed him in passing, the way he moved with easy confidence, the way he always touched his hat brim when he saw her, the way he never spoke unless he had something worth saying. Now he approached her slowly, respectfully, his hat held against his chest. Up close, she could see the genuine sorrow in his eyes and something else too, something like determination. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low and steady, "I am truly sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man, the best I ever worked for." "Thank you, Mr. Lucas," she managed, her throat tight. "He spoke highly of you as well." Graham looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands, then met her eyes again. "I know this is not the time, and I will understand if you want to send me on my way, but I want you to know something. Your father taught me more about horses and about being a decent man in these past months than I learned in all my years before. I owe him a debt I can never repay." Lillian felt fresh tears threatening and blinked them back. She had cried enough for one day. He would be glad to know his teaching mattered to someone. "It mattered more than I can say," Graham continued, his gaze unwavering. "And I know you have the ranch to run now and decisions to make. I want to stay on if you will have me, not just for the work, though I will work hard, but because I want to honor your father's memory by helping you keep his dream alive. This ranch, these horses, they meant everything to him. They should not be lost because he was taken too soon." Something in Lillian's chest loosened slightly. The future had seemed like a dark tunnel stretching ahead of her, but here was someone offering a light, however small. "I would be grateful for your help, Mr. Lucas. I cannot run the ranch alone, and I cannot afford to hire multiple hands. If you are willing to stay for the wages my father was paying you, I would be much obliged." "I will stay," Graham said simply. "And you can count on me, Miss Carter, for whatever you need." The next weeks blurred together in a haze of work and grief. Lillian woke before dawn each day, made coffee in the quiet kitchen where her father would never sit again, and went about the business of keeping the ranch running. There were horses to feed and water, stalls to muck, fences to mend, and accounts to balance. Her father had left meticulous records, but seeing his familiar handwriting in the ledgers made her chest ache. Graham worked from sunup to sundown, often longer. He handled the heavy labor without complaint, fixed things that were broken, and began the delicate work of training the young horses they had purchased in the spring. Lillian watched him sometimes from the porch as she shelled peas or mended tack. He had a gift with the animals, just as her father had said. He never raised his voice, never lost his patience. He would stand in the corral with a green colt, just breathing with it, letting it learn his scent and his presence before asking anything of it. One afternoon in early October, Lillian brought a pitcher of water out to where Graham was working with a particularly skittish 2-year-old mare. The horse had been her father's last purchase, a beautiful paint with intelligent eyes and a deep fear of humans. Her father had planned to gentle her slowly over the winter. "She is making progress," Lillian said, pouring water into a tin cup and handing it to Graham. He drank deeply, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "She has heart. Someone hurt her before your father bought her. She just needs to learn that not all hands bring pain." My father said the same thing. Graham looked at her then, really looked at her, and Lillian felt something shift in the air between them. He knew what he was talking about, not just with horses, I reckon. Lillian understood his meaning. Her father had known about hurt and healing in all its forms. He had lost his beloved wife and raised a daughter alone, pouring his grief into gentle hands and patient teaching. "He did," she agreed softly. "Miss Carter," Graham said after a moment, his voice careful. "I hope I am not speaking out of turn, but I have noticed you are not eating much. Mrs. Henderson mentioned it when I saw her in town. You need to keep your strength up." Lillian felt a flash of irritation. "Mrs. Henderson should mind her own business. She cares about you. Everyone in Walla Walla cares about you. Your father was respected, and so are you." Graham set down the cup. "But caring and speaking up are different things. So I am speaking up. You cannot run this ranch if you make yourself sick." The irritation faded as quickly as it had come, replaced by something warmer. When was the last time someone had worried about her welfare, not out of nosiness but out of genuine concern? "I will try to do better," she said quietly. "That is all I ask." Graham turned back to the mare, but not before Lillian saw the relief in his eyes. That evening, she made herself eat a full plate of stew, even though her appetite had been absent since the funeral. The next morning, Graham found a fresh loaf of bread wrapped in cloth waiting for him on the bunkhouse step, still warm from the oven. The rhythm of their days took on a comfortable pattern. They worked side by side, speaking little but understanding much. Graham would report on the horse's progress over breakfast, and Lillian would share what she had learned from her father's records, piecing together his plans for the breeding program. In the evenings, after the work was done, they sometimes sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the blue mountains in the distance. It was during one of these evenings, nearly a month after the funeral, that Graham told her about his own past. They were shelling walnuts from the tree beside the house, the rhythmic crack of the shells filling the comfortable silence. "I grew up in Missouri," Graham said suddenly. "My father was a farmer, wheat mostly. He expected me to take over the farm when he got old, but I could not see myself doing the same work in the same place for the rest of my life. When I was 18, we had a terrible argument about it. I left the next morning without saying goodbye." Lillian's hands stilled on the nutcracker. "Did you ever reconcile?" "No. He died 2 years later. My brother wrote to tell me, but I was in Texas by then working cattle drives. I did not make it back in time for the funeral." Graham's jaw tightened. "I thought I had all the time in the world to make things right. I was wrong." "I am sorry," Lillian said, and meant it. "I tell you this because I see you carrying your grief like a burden. I know that weight. It does not get lighter, but you learn to carry it better." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the last of the sunset. "Your father knew you loved him, Miss Carter. You have nothing to regret." Tears welled up in Lillian's eyes, the first she had shed since the day of the funeral. "I miss him terribly." "I know." Graham's voice was gentle. "That is how you know the love was real." Without thinking, Lillian reached out and placed her hand over his. Graham went very still, then slowly turned his palm up to clasp her fingers. They sat like that as darkness fell, hands joined, sharing the weight of their respective losses and finding comfort in not being alone. From that night forward, something changed between them. The grief was still there, a constant companion to Lillian's days, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. She found herself looking forward to Graham's presence, to their conversations, to the way he made her laugh with dry observations about the cantankerous rooster or the milk cow's stubborn refusal to cooperate. Graham, for his part, began to show his feelings in small ways. He fixed the squeaky board on the porch that had annoyed her for months. He brought her wildflowers from the fields, presenting them awkwardly and claiming he thought they might brighten up the house. He insisted on checking the henhouse lock each night after a fox had been spotted in the area, even though it meant walking back from the bunkhouse in the dark. November brought the first snow, dusting the ranch in white and reminding them that winter was coming. They needed to prepare, to ensure the horses had adequate shelter and feed, to stock supplies for the months when trips to town would be difficult. One morning, as they worked together to reinforce the barn roof, Lillian found herself watching Graham more than working. He had removed his coat despite the cold, and she could see the strength in his arms as he hammered shingles into place. She thought about how much she had come to depend on him, not just for his labor but for his steady presence, his quiet wisdom, his gentle humor. "You are staring," Graham said without looking down, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking." "About what?" Now he did look at her, pausing in his work. She could have deflected, could have made up something about the roof or the weather. Instead, she found herself speaking the truth. "About how grateful I am that you stayed. I could not have managed this place without you." Graham climbed down the ladder and stood before her, his expression serious. "I did not stay just for the ranch, Lillian." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it from his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "No, no." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his sage-colored eyes. "I stayed because of you. I have been wanting to tell you, but it seemed wrong to speak of such things while you were grieving. But I cannot keep quiet any longer. I admire you, Lillian. Your strength, your dedication to honoring your father's work, the way you face each day even when I can see how much you are hurting. You are the finest woman I have ever known." Lillian's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. "Graham, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I understand if you do not feel the same way. I just needed you to know. I want to be here, not just as a hired hand, but as someone who cares for you deeply. Someone who wants to help you build a future, if you will have me." All the feelings Lillian had been trying to suppress, trying to tell herself were just gratitude or the need for companionship in her loneliness, suddenly crystallized into clarity. She cared for Graham Lucas, more than cared. She had been falling in love with him gradually, day by day, moment by moment, and had been too afraid to acknowledge it. I feel the same way, she whispered. I have been afraid to admit it, even to myself. It seemed too soon, too complicated. But the truth is, you have become so important to me, Graham. I do not want to imagine this place, this life, without you in it. The smile that broke across Graham's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. You mean it. I mean it. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. I know I am just a drifting cowboy with nothing much to offer, but I swear to you, Lillian, if you give me a chance, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I will honor your father's memory by loving you right, by helping you build the life he wanted for you, by being the man he would have wanted by your side. Lillian leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. You already are that man. When Graham kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Lillian felt as though something that had been frozen inside her since her father's death was finally beginning to thaw. The grief was still there, would always be there in some measure, but now there was room for joy too, for hope, for love. They stood there in the cold November morning, holding each other, and Lillian thought about how her father would have felt seeing them together. She believed he would have been happy. He had liked Graham, had trusted him, had seen the good man beneath the quiet exterior. In his last days, fevered and weak, her father had gripped her hand and told her not to be alone, to find someone worthy and let them in. At the time, she had not understood. Now she did. The winter that followed was hard in some ways and beautiful in others. The snow piled deep, and there were days when the wind howled so fiercely that venturing outside was dangerous. But inside the ranch house, with a fire crackling in the hearth and Graham sitting across from her at the table her father had built, Lillian felt a contentment she had not known was possible in the wake of such loss. They spent the long evenings planning for the spring, discussing which mares to breed and which bloodlines to introduce. Graham had ideas based on his time working other ranches, and Lillian had her father's meticulous notes about each horse's temperament and conformation. Together, they created a plan that honored Thomas Carter's vision while incorporating new possibilities. But they also talked about other things, about their dreams and fears, about the lives they had lived before finding each other. Graham told her about his years drifting from job to job, never quite fitting in anywhere, always feeling like something was missing. Lillian spoke about growing up without a mother, about the loneliness of being the only child, about how she had sometimes wondered if she would spend her whole life on this ranch with only her father for company. I used to watch the other girls in town with their bows, Lillian confessed one night as they sat by the fire, her head resting on Graham's shoulder. I wondered what it would be like to have someone look at me the way those young men looked at them. But I was busy with the ranch and my father needed me and the years just seemed to slip by. Graham pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Their loss was my gain. I cannot imagine you with anyone else. Nor can I, Lillian said, tilting her face up to look at him. It is strange how life works. If my father had not hired you, if he had chosen someone else or decided to manage with just the two of us for one more season, we never would have met. I believe some things are meant to be, Graham said. I had been working a ranch down in Oregon, and I got laid off when the owner decided to sell. I was heading east, no particular destination in mind, when I heard about your father looking for help. Something told me to stop in Walla Walla and ask about the job. I almost kept riding, but I did not. Now I know why. December turned to January, and on a clear, cold day when the snow sparkled like diamonds in the sun, Graham asked Lillian to marry him properly. He had saved his wages and rode into town to buy a simple gold band from the jeweler. He presented it to her in the barn of all places, where they were checking on a mare due to foal any day. "It is not fancy," Graham said, suddenly nervous as he held out the ring. "But it is solid and real, like what I feel for you. Lillian Carter, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Lillian did not hesitate. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in February at the small church in Walla Walla, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears. Reverend Morrison beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. And when Graham kissed his bride, Lillian felt her father's presence like a blessing, as if he were there in spirit, approving of the man who would care for his daughter and carry on his legacy. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn and food enough to feed everyone twice over. The community had embraced their union, glad to see Lillian happy again, glad to see the Carter ranch continuing under capable hands. People danced to fiddle music and toasted the newlyweds with apple cider and, for some of the men, something stronger from hidden flasks. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Graham pulled Lillian aside into the quiet of the tack room. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands warm on her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be after losing my father," Lillian answered honestly. "You have given me hope again, Graham, a reason to look forward instead of only back." "We will keep his memory alive together," Graham promised. "In the horses we raise, in the way we run this ranch, in the stories we tell, Thomas Carter will never be forgotten." Lillian kissed her husband, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, she said, "He would have loved you like a son." "I know he would have." "That means everything to me," Graham said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never had the chance to make things right with my own father, but I can honor yours. I can be the man he would have wanted for you, and I can live a life that would make him proud." They stood there in the tack room, surrounded by the smell of leather and hay and horses, and made silent promises to each other, and to the man who had brought them together, however indirectly. Then they returned to their guests, hand in hand, ready to celebrate and later to begin their life together as husband and wife. The first years of their marriage were filled with hard work and small triumphs. The ranch grew steadily, gaining a reputation for producing quality horses with good temperaments. Graham's skill as a trainer combined with Lillian's business acumen and knowledge of bloodlines created a formidable partnership. They expanded slowly, carefully, always mindful of not overextending themselves. In the spring of 1887, Lillian discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Her own mother had died in childbirth, and the fear of history repeating itself haunted her. Graham sensed her worry without her having to speak it aloud. "We will get the best doctor," he assured her, holding her close. "And I will be right there with you every step of the way. Nothing is going to happen to you. I won't allow it." Lillian managed a shaky laugh. "I do not think you get to make that decision." "Watch me," Graham said with such fierce determination that she almost believed he could will her safety into existence through sheer force of love. The months of her pregnancy passed slowly. Graham was endlessly patient with her changing moods and increasing discomfort. He took over more of the physical labor, insisting she rest more than she wanted to. He brought her tea in the mornings and rubbed her aching feet in the evenings. He talked to her swelling belly, telling their unborn child about the grandfather it would never meet, about the horses and the ranch and the wide sky of Washington Territory. When her time came in December, the doctor did indeed attend, along with Mrs. Henderson and 2 other experienced women from town. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Graham, pacing outside the bedroom door, thought he might lose his mind from helplessness and fear. But finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch, he heard the strong, angry cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Mr. Lucas. A healthy, strong son, and your wife is doing well." Graham felt his knees go weak with relief. He rushed into the room to find Lillian exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in a blanket her father had used as a child, which she had saved all these years. "Meet your son," Lillian said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor but filled with wonder. Graham took the baby carefully, awed by how small and perfect he was. The infant stopped crying and opened dark blue eyes, seeming to study his father's face with serious intensity. "Hello there, little man," Graham whispered. "I am your father, and I am going to love you and protect you all your life." They named him Thomas, after Lillian's father, with Graham as his middle name. Little Thomas grew quickly, thriving in the clean air and loving environment of the ranch. He was a happy baby, curious and active, and from the time he could walk, he followed his father everywhere, toddling after Graham around the barn and corrals. Lillian would sometimes stand on the porch and watch her husband and son together, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could contain so much love. Graham was a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching even as he protected. He would set Thomas on the gentlest horses before the boy could barely talk, holding him secure and teaching him to feel the animal's rhythm. "He is a natural," Graham told Lillian one afternoon, when Thomas was 2 years old. The boy had just ridden a plodding old mare around the corral, laughing with delight the whole time. Just like his grandfather. "His grandfather would have adored him," Lillian said, watching Thomas pet the mare's nose with chubby, careful hands, already learning to be gentle. "He does adore him," Graham said quietly. "Wherever he is, I believe that." Life continued its steady rhythm. The ranch prospered. Thomas grew from toddler to boy, learning his letters from his mother and his horsemanship from his father. In 1890, Lillian gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, and 2 years after that, another son they called William. The house that had once seemed so empty and quiet rang with children's laughter and the organized chaos of a growing family. Graham proved himself a devoted father to all 3 children, but he never forgot his promise to honor Thomas Carter's memory. He told the children stories about their grandfather, about his skill with horses and his kind heart. He showed them the careful records Thomas had kept, teaching them to value knowledge and planning. He took them to visit the grave in the Walla Walla Cemetery, helping them place wildflowers on the headstone. When young Thomas was 12, old enough to understand, Graham sat him down and told him about his own estrangement from his father, about the regret that still haunted him decades later. "Never leave things unsaid with the people you love," Graham told his son seriously. "Never assume you have more time. Tell them you love them. Show them through your actions. Make sure they know what they mean to you. That is the most important lesson I can teach you." Thomas, a thoughtful boy who looked remarkably like the grandfather he was named for, nodded solemnly. "I will remember, Father. I promise." As the children grew, they each found their place in the ranch's operation. Thomas inherited his grandfather's and father's gift with horses. Clara had a sharp mind for numbers and began helping her mother with the business side of things while still quite young. William, the youngest, was more interested in the mechanical side of things, fascinated by the new equipment beginning to make its way into agricultural work. The turn of the century found the Lucas family well established and respected throughout Washington, which had achieved statehood in 1889. The ranch had grown from Thomas Carter's modest operation into one of the premier horse breeding operations in the region. But success had not changed the fundamental values at the ranch's heart. The values of hard work, integrity, and gentle strength that Thomas Carter had embodied, and that Graham and Lillian had maintained. On a warm summer evening in 1902, Graham and Lillian sat on the porch, watching the sun set just as they had done countless times over the years. Their children were grown now, Thomas at 20 and helping run the ranch, Clara at 17 and preparing to attend college in Seattle, William at 15 and already talking about studying engineering. "Do you ever think about how different life might have been if I had ridden past Walla Walla that day?" Graham asked, his hand clasped with Lillian's as it always was during these quiet moments. "I try not to," Lillian admitted. "The thought is too terrible. I might have had to sell the ranch, or married someone suitable but unloved just for the security. I certainly would not have this life, these children, this happiness." "Your father brought us together," Graham said. "Even in dying, he gave you a gift. He hired me, trusted me, taught me. Without him, I would have just been another drifting cowboy. He gave me a purpose and a home." Lillian leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, just as she had done so many times over the 17 years of their marriage. "You gave me hope when I thought I would drown in grief. You honored your promise, Graham. You have loved me right, just as you said you would." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I ever did," Graham said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I am not done yet. We have years ahead of us still, God willing." They did indeed have years ahead. They saw their children marry and start families of their own. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from Oregon and brought her to live on the ranch, continuing the family business into the next generation. Clara met a professor during her college years and settled in Seattle, but visited often with her husband and growing brood of children. William became an engineer as he had dreamed, working on the new automobile technology. But he never lost his love for the ranch and spent every summer there with his family. Graham and Lillian became grandparents many times over, and they embraced the role with joy. The ranch house was constantly full of children and noise and love. Graham taught his grandchildren to ride just as he had taught his own children, with patience and care. Lillian baked bread and told stories, and made sure each grandchild knew about their great-grandfather Thomas Carter, the man whose dream had started it all. As they aged, Graham and Lillian began to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting the capable hands of their son Thomas and his wife. But they remained active and engaged, offering advice when asked, sharing the wisdom of decades of experience. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1917, their children threw them a party that brought people from all over Washington and beyond. Friends, business associates, family members, all gathered to celebrate a marriage that had endured and deepened over 3 decades. During the party, young Thomas, now 30 and a father of 4 himself, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "They built this ranch on the foundation my grandfather laid, but more than that, they built a family on a foundation of love and respect. My father once told me that he promised my grandfather he would honor his memory by loving my mother right. I can say with certainty that he has kept that promise every single day of my life." To Graham and Lillian Lucas, the finest people I know. The assembled crowd cheered and raised their glasses. Graham looked at Lillian, seeing not the 60-year-old woman with silver threading through her hair, but the beautiful, grieving 23-year-old he had fallen in love with all those years ago. She smiled at him, and he saw the same recognition in her eyes, the knowledge that they were looking at their partner, their love, their home. Later, when the guests had gone and they were alone in the quiet house, Graham pulled Lillian into his arms. 30 years, he marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I would do it all again," Lillian said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, as long as it was with you." "Your father would be proud," Graham said, as he had said many times over the years, "of what we have built here, of the family we have raised, of the love we have shared." "I know he would," Lillian agreed. "And I am grateful every day that he brought you into my life. Even in my deepest grief, there was the seed of my greatest joy, though I could not see it at the time." They swayed together in the living room, to music only they could hear. Two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss and built something beautiful together. The ranch around them stood as testament to their hard work and dedication. But more importantly, it stood as testament to the power of love to heal, to grow, to endure. As the years continued to pass, Graham and Lillian grew old together with grace. They watched the world change around them, saw automobiles replace horses on many roads, saw electricity come to rural Washington, saw their grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. But through all the changes, the ranch remained, and their love remained constant and true. When Graham was 72 and Lillian was 70, they took a trip back to the Walla Walla Cemetery where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other, where Lillian's father rested. The headstone had weathered over the decades, but it was well maintained, thanks to regular visits from the family. They stood there hand in hand, just as they had stood so many times before, and Graham spoke aloud to the man he had never stopped trying to honor. "I kept my promise, Thomas. I loved her right. I gave her the best life I could. I hope I made you proud." Lillian squeezed his hand, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. "He is proud. I know he is. And he is grateful to you for loving his daughter and raising his grandchildren and keeping his dream alive." "No," Graham said softly. "I am the grateful one, for being trusted with something so precious, for being given the chance to be part of something bigger than myself, for finding love when I had stopped looking for it." They stood there for a long while, remembering and honoring and loving. Then they walked back to their automobile, driven by their grandson, and returned to the ranch that was their legacy, their home, their life's work. Graham Lucas lived to be 83 years old. He remained active on the ranch almost to the end, still able to gentle a nervous horse with his quiet presence even when his body had grown frail. When he finally passed in his sleep in 1943, Lillian was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it countless times over their 56 years of marriage. The funeral was attended by hundreds. 3 generations of Lucases and Carters gathered to mourn and celebrate a man who had been a devoted husband, loving father, doting grandfather and great-grandfather, skilled horseman, and honorable friend. They buried him in the Walla Walla Cemetery, not far from Thomas Carter, and the headstone read, "Graham Lucas, beloved husband and father who kept his promises." Lillian lived for 2 more years after Graham's death, long enough to see the end of World War II, long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild. She spent her final years surrounded by family, telling stories of the old days, of her father and her husband, of the ranch as it had been and as it had become. When she finally joined Graham in 1945 at the age of 83, her children found a letter she had written, to be opened after her death. In it, she wrote about her life, her loves, her losses, but the final paragraph was addressed to Graham. "My dearest husband," she had written in her shaky but still legible hand, "you came into my life in my darkest hour and brought light. You promised my father you would honor his memory by loving me right, and you exceeded that promise in every way. You gave me a life full of love, laughter, purpose, and family. You were my partner, my comfort, my joy. I am not afraid to die because I know I will see you again and my father too. Wait for me, my love. I will not be long." They buried her beside Graham, and the three Graves, Thomas Carter, Graham Lucas, and Lillian Carter Lucas, stood together as testament to the bonds of love and family that transcend even death. The ranch continued through the generations, each one adding their own touches while honoring the foundation laid by Thomas Carter and built upon by Graham and Lillian. The Lucas name became synonymous with quality horses and integrity in business throughout Washington and beyond. But more than that, it became synonymous with family, with the understanding that legacy is not just about land or money or reputation, but about the values you pass down and the love you share. The great-great-grandchildren who never knew Graham or Lillian or Thomas Carter in life still knew them through stories. They knew about the horseman who had died too young, but left a lasting legacy. They knew about the cowboy who had kept his promise to honor that legacy through love. They knew about the woman who had mourned her father and found her future. They knew that the ranch they called home was built on foundations of grief transformed into hope, of loss leading to love, of promises kept across generations. And on summer evenings, when the sun set over the blue mountains and the horses nickered softly in their paddocks, if you listened carefully, you might almost hear the echo of two people sitting on a porch, hands clasped, hearts joined, honoring the past while embracing the future, proving that the truest legacy is love.